Welcome to Paths to Restoration. I'm Ed Cyzewski, the author of Reconnect, Spiritual Restoration from Digital Distraction. And I am joined by Elizabeth Maxon, as long as my spotty internet connection will let us have a conversation together. She is the host or the guide of the Breathing Room group, and we'll talk more about that soon. And she is also the author of Begin. It's a book about spiritual disciplines, as well as the book Wonderland, about their daughter's journey through diabetes. Thanks so much for joining me, Elizabeth.
It's so great to be here, Ed. Thank you.
All right. Well, we kind of follow like a little bit of a script here, just with some of the questions I ask, and but we'll kind of follow whatever rabbit trails seem good for us along the way. First of all, I wanted you to just share a little bit about your work and what you're up to, your ministry, your writing, your group, and then any ways that maybe like smartphones or social media might intersect with it as well, as we kind of talk about that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. So it's interesting. I think I kind of have to say that what God's been teaching me about social media and how I use it in my life has honestly shaped a lot of the ministry work that I'm doing right now, which is why I'm so excited about the work that you do and Reconnect and all of the things that you're working on, this podcast and everything, because I think it's so needed. But just to give you kind of a little bit of a backstory. So this idea of the Breathing Room, which is an online community for women that I jokingly call a gym membership for your soul, because I think it's the best way to describe it. It's basically a place where in community we can do spiritual practices together and learn more about contemplative practices and spiritual formation. But it's been a dream of mine for a while to create a community like this. And it was really birthed out of when I wrote the book Begin, which is about spiritual practices. It was kind of a next step. I would go and speak to groups of women and feel like, okay, we are really digging deep. We're really learning and growing in relation to these different spiritual practices. And then I would leave them. I'd be with them for a day or for a weekend and make these connections. And then, I know you can relate to this, and then you leave. And so the book was kind of a first step of like, here, take this with you. This will help you continue your journey. And then the community was even a further step of like, let's do this together. Let's continue to journey together in community. But there were still a lot of unknowns about what that community would look like. And so one of the advantages of the pandemic for me was that it gave a little bit more time and space for me to work on developing this community at a time when I didn't think I would have that time and space. And really within that time and space, some things happened for me related to social media that really shaped kind of what the community looks like now. And so I think for me, as a writer in the past, I have utilized social media to connect with my audience. I've used it for my writing, which has been great. But I've always had to put some boundaries and parameters on myself related to it, because I could feel it becoming unhealthy if I wasn't careful. But it has been a great tool. But over this past year, honestly, we just went through some really difficult things as a family that just by necessity, I had to step totally away. So for almost 6 months, and it wasn't even like this grand plan of like, I'm going to step away from, so it was just like, I didn't have the capacity for it. So So for almost 6 months, I stepped away from it. And some things happened in my life and my marriage and my role as a mom, in my heart in general, as a result of that I wasn't expecting. And it was really good for me and for our family on a lot of different levels. And, anytime you can totally step away from something that you've kind of been entrenched in for a while, it helps give you a different perspective on it. And that helped me with that, to take that time and step away. And to be honest, I was very apprehensive to step back into it, because I felt like I had gotten to such a healthy place away from it that I didn't know what it would look like for me to step back into it. And I didn't want to lose some of that ground that I felt like I had gained. And so I very reluctantly stepped back in. and there were good things. I was able to reconnect in some ways with people, which was great. But shortly thereafter, I realized, okay, I need I thought I had a good plan. I
Yeah.
thought I had, some good parameters, but I need something more if I'm going to step back into this space. And so it was kind of like I dipped my toe back in for a little bit. And I thought, nope, this isn't, because I knew what life was like on the other side without being. And so,
Yeah.
okay, so then I
Yeah.
had to step back out. Well, what was interesting was I just felt compelled to share on Instagram. I did an Instagram live video just sharing, hey, I'm going to step away from social media again. I'm just going to take a week and I'm going to be really intentional about thinking about writing out, what is my plan for social media? What am I using it for? What are the parameters that I want to have on it? And I'm going to really be intentional and thoughtful about this. And I'm going to take a week. If anybody else is feeling this tension and feeling like they need to do something like that, feel free to join me. Shoot me a message. I would love to. Well, a handful of women joined me. And what came of that was really the core of what the breathing room has kind of turned into, which was really interesting. So when you ask how my use of social media and all of that intersects with my work, it's interesting how that learning and that intentionality around trying to figure that out, because what we did was we said, we're going to replace, so we're going to meet every morning. So this was back in the end of May. We said, we're going to meet every morning via Zoom, and we're going to do a spiritual practice together. And I just invited any of these women that wanted to do that. And so we met every morning for a week. We said, for this week, no social media, no Facebook, no Instagram, no Twitter, nothing. And instead, we're going to get together every morning on Zoom, face-to-face live. And we did Lectio Divina together. We did group spiritual direction together. And we spent that time just hearing from God and trying to reset ourselves. And then trying to be intentional about, okay, how do we step back into this? And for some of us, we felt like at the end of a week, we weren't ready to step back in, and that was okay. We still needed some more time. So, but what came of that was just, that is now every Wednesday morning, we do what we call Soul Care Live in the breathing room. And that's really was birthed out of that time of us realizing having group time in spiritual practices was really a great thing to kind of help reset ourselves so that then we could enter back into social media or whatever it was in a healthy way. So I don't know if that answers your question in any way.
Yeah, that's right on the money. I mean, so like I know that you're a very like intentional person as far as how you've used social media in the past. I mean, I feel like you're one of those people who posts like, things that are useful and helpful. But I'm curious, like what was like the quality of the connection like when you switched from this like kind of what I say in like social media, we're kind of just like shooting something out into the dark versus you're in a video call with a group, talk a little bit about like some of those dynamics and how you felt.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say to back up to your first statement about just being intentional about social media, it's interesting, probably about, 7 or 8 years ago. So, when I was first on social media, pretty regularly with Facebook, and I don't even know how involved I was with Instagram at that point, but I remember running into a girl that I went to college with, and her saying to me, hey, I just want to let you know, I really appreciate what you're doing on social media. And at that point in time, I wasn't really thinking about what I was doing on social media. I think it was still kind of this early, I think a lot of us were just trying to figure out, what are we going to use this for?
Yeah.
But it was an important moment for me because I realized I'm doing something with social media, whether I'm being intentional about it or not. And fortunately, whatever the handful of things she had seen had been something positive and life-giving to her. So by the grace of God, whatever. But it made me realize this is an opportunity, and so I really I do need to be intentional. And so that shift kind of happened for me then. But I will say, I am a person who loves to connect with people. And so in some ways it can be addictive for me. I mean, as with a lot of people, that connectedness of connecting with people and seeing like how many people I can connect with in that way, almost gives you like this little high of like, okay, I'm connecting with people.
Yeah.
But it is very different to answer your question. There's a very different quality to it than these Zoom calls that we're doing, where we are seeing people face to face in real time. We are seeing each other's expressions on our faces, even though we are not in the same physical room with each other. To be able to read someone else's expressions, to be able to see when they tear up, which happens a lot of times for us, there's something that we're talking through, to be able to respond in real time, whether it's with a facial expression or with a word, or even just a nod of a head. All of these things are creating a much deeper, richer relationship with these women than just a one-off, statement or a one-off comment. Don't get me wrong, I love to write, and so I love to put together basically like a mini blog post sometime of thoughts and put it together in a nice little package and then kind of offer it out there to people. I enjoy doing that, but there is not the connection that happens when you're face to face in an interaction with somebody. So yeah, it's a very different quality of connection for sure.
I'm curious, like how, did you feel like, when you're getting off those calls, like how do you feel after you're done? I mean, 'cause I think that's like one of the things. It's like we use social media sometimes, and sometimes it could be meaningful and helpful to make some connections that way. But I feel like sometimes it's almost draining. Like a lot of times we like say like I'm gonna veg out and do some social media, or whatever, and you almost feel worse afterwards. Like how do you feel after these Zoom calls?
Yeah, that's another great question, Ed. First of all, yes, to what you just said, I can relate to the whole coming off of a social media binge or whatever, and just going into it, hoping for a little bit of rest or relief, and then coming out of it feeling heavier, really, than when you went into it.
Yeah.
I can definitely relate to that. And so I think for me, I know my bent sometimes with that is if there's something hard I'm facing or something difficult, sometimes I just want to avoid it.
Yeah.
There's something with my kids or my husband or just something around the house or whatever it might be. If I want to avoid that, a hard thing, then I can use that as a distraction. But what I've learned is that I can enter into social media in a much more healthy way if I deal with the hard things first. And then I'm entering into that not as an avoidance or as a distraction or as an escape, but I'm entering into it intentionally, not reactively, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah.
So there's a difference in the feeling of when I enter into it intentionally with a purpose and I'm coming in here to do something and then I'm stepping back out versus let me just dive into here for a little while and try. There's different feelings. But even when I'm approaching it in a healthy way, even when I am being intentional about it, there still is this kind of, when you're on a Zoom call face to face with someone and you're having a conversation like we're having right now, which is, great. We can see each other and we can respond to each other and hear the tone of our voices and all of those things. I feel it's very life-giving to me. There is a give and a take. There's a kind of an ebb and a flow of the conversation. And so it feels more like this interaction that's taking place that then when we're finished, we're finished. And it is what it is. And we've done that. And then, in the case of the breathing room, we'll see you next week. We'll come back next week and we'll do something again next week. One of the hard things for me with social media is it's never ending. There's not I can get in there and maybe engage a little bit, but then, but now somebody else has commented. And so now so that adds something else to the conversation. And now it's just kind of like this never ending. And sometimes that feels exhausting to me and overwhelming. And it, then the conversation, takes different shapes and forms and moves, and it's just feels kind of like it takes on this life of its own. So for me to have contained within a certain time and space, and that's one of the biggest things for me personally, it is hard for me to keep, even if I have certain parameters, even if I have certain times of day or the week or whatever that I'm utilizing social media, mentally, it is hard for me to keep it in its little box.
Yeah.
Because even if I'm not on there, right?
Yeah.
Even if I'm not on there, sometimes I'm thinking about it, or I'm thinking about that, how I responded to that comment, and maybe I need to go back and follow up on that, or, or maybe I should add this, and so, yeah, there's definitely the Zoom calls, the face-to-face conversations that we have are much more life-giving to me than anything that I ever do on social media, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love the fact that, the thoughts of just creating that authentic connection kind of spurred you into this, and how it just kind of evolved organically. I'm curious, like today, knowing that this might change next week, and it was probably different a month ago, what kinds of barriers or rules or guidelines are you following as you use social media, especially keeping in mind soul care, kind of guarding yourself? Like how are you placing, and maybe barriers isn't the right word, but what guidelines are you using to use social media these days?
Yeah, and you're right to say, what are you using today? Because I do, it is, you're right. It's an ongoing, evolving, and it changes. And I feel like I have to kind of stay on my toes to stay on top of it. But for me right now, just very practically speaking, for, gosh, probably at least 2 years, more than that at this point, I have not had Facebook on my phone.
Wow.
So I took Facebook off of my phone a long time ago, and I can obviously still access it if I need to, but it's, something about just those extra steps of having to get on Safari and get on, it makes me take it, think about it a little bit more and think, do I really need to do this right now? I try to just engage Facebook if I need to on my computer. I'm not on Twitter at all. I was for like a hot second, and then I was like, you know what, this is just one more thing I can't. So
Interesting.
so that hasn't been an issue for me. But the social media platform that I enjoy the most, and that I feel like I can have a relatively healthy relationship with, is Instagram. And so really I feed all of my Instagram posts to Facebook. So the only time I get on Facebook really is I will give myself certain blocks of time after I've posted, that I'll go back, and if there's any comments, I want to interact with people around different comments, and so that's great. Sorry. So just with my husband. No, but I do. One of the things, another parameter for me related to that is that I've learned one thing that helps me is if I'm going to post something, and I try to post one thing of substance a week on Instagram. And so, so maybe it's something that I've kind of been, something that God's revealed to me. And so I've snapped a picture of a moment or something. And this goes back to me not letting it bleed over into every part of my life and all of my mental space. The reality is, I mean, I could probably have like a dozen ideas a day of things. None of them may be good ideas, but of things that I want to post or whatever, or see all these different things. But what I've learned is that if I'm trying to document and share all of these pieces of my life, there's some joy in it that's lost for me personally in experiencing it. And so for me, I've had to retrain myself, because I got into a really bad pattern of like, oh, these are great things with my kids and with my, my ministry and all of these different things. And I just want to keep sharing these. But I realized the more I was sharing them, my joy around them diminished, because I felt like I had to package them up and present them a certain way. So I've gone to just like, let's take one thing a week that really, I feel like God has really just risen up to the surface for me that I want to share. And so I'll be intentional about that post. And I try to do it every Monday, but I don't. I try to make Monday like my day that I do that. So whatever it is, I have my picture and I write up and then I post it. And then the thing that helps me the most is to post it and then leave it. And then to designate a time later that evening, that afternoon or evening, give myself, 20, 30 minutes that then I can come back and see if people have commented or have messages. I want to respond to all those, but then it doesn't steal my whole day. It allows, and it gets me out of that addictive mindset of like, oh, did anybody else like it? Did anybody else comment on it?
Yeah.
So I don't want to be in that mode all day, because it takes my attention from my kids. It takes my attention from my husband, and just from the things that God's doing around me, and so that's been a big one for me.
I feel like we all like have that experience you just described, but like not a lot of people will admit that. You know what I mean? Like, like we all want someone to like comment or leave a like or whatever, which I think is that quality of like interaction on social media where you're like shooting something out into the void and hoping people like it. And there's that pressure, I think, to get that affirmation and feedback.
Yes. And it makes me, it helps retrain my brain on, why am I doing this? Am I doing this, to get some kind of, for my ego to get a boost? Or am I truly, what I want to do is to use this as a ministry tool and as a way to encourage and equip and support, other people. So if that's what I'm using it for, then I need to behave accordingly.
Yeah. And to promote Clemson football too.
Absolutely. Which we're hoping we're going to be able to do this fall. So far, so good. Yeah. Important things, priorities, right?
One of the interesting things here, you talk about this, the breathing room, and not to put, words or ideas, in here for you, but it's almost like that seems like a really scalable thing. Like I know that you do a lot of stuff for it, but it's like, this is something where people who maybe are feeling a little disconnected or maybe struggling with social media overuse because they want to make connections with people or feel lonely, like they could do something like this almost.
Yes, absolutely. And I would say, Zoom, and this is the great thing about this time during the pandemic, a lot of people are more comfortable with Zoom now. And I was laughing, I was listening to your interview with Seth Haynes, and he was saying he was Zooming before Zooming was cool. I don't think I'm quite as, a veteran Zoomer as he is, but I've been a fan of Zoom for a while because of that face-to-face interaction.
Yeah.
But a lot more people now are using it and are comfortable with it. And so, yes, in fact, I've encouraged even our members within the breathing room, I've encouraged them, you can take what we're doing, what you're learning from what we're doing in this space, and you can do your own, and I'll help you get started. But yeah, just having a regular time that you could get together on Zoom. I think one of the most important things I have some leaders within there, because sometimes we break out into small groups, because as the community's grown, we want to keep that intimacy of everybody being able to share. And so we'll break out into small groups sometimes. And I tell my leaders, one of the most important things is be okay with silence, because I think even more than in person, there's a little delay between, when you stop and then they want to share. And so I've been amazed, just giving little bits of time. Everybody on there shares. Everybody, has gotten comfortable. And so yeah, I would definitely say it's a great way to connect in real time, away from social media. And that was one of our things, we're still actually working on developing our community forum where we have like comments on all of our videos and stuff where people can discuss. But I was really adamant that we were not going to have a Facebook group for it. And so, yeah, we're trying to keep everything. I just know what that has looked like in my life. It's just so overwhelming. So it's a challenge, to try to find creative ways, but you can. And yeah, and I think Zoom is a great tool for that, for sure.
Cool. Um, so, as we're kind of winding things down here, I was wondering if is there like one spiritual practice or just practice in general that restores you or grounds you, or is there something in particular this in the past week or so that's been restorative for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll say this. I think one of the draws for me with taking this back to social media, for a lot of us probably, is that there's always something new out there on
Mm,
social media. I could pick up my phone at any time and there's something new being said, some new picture, some new idea, some new thing. And that is very much a draw for me. And I say that because one of the things that God has revealed to me about myself, and I think it's probably true of a lot of other people too, is that I need to seek out that in my spiritual life as well, of spiritual practices. There's always new ways that I can engage God. I can do Lectio Divina, I can do journaling, I can do, contemplative prayer, I can do meditations. I mean, as you know, there are,
mm, mm.
and there's a million little variations on every one of those things to do them in different ways. I can engage God, when I'm folding my laundry, by doing certain things. So anyway, I say that to say I am very much a person who mixes up my spiritual practices regularly. Now,
Mm.
I'm a 4 on the Enneagram. My husband is a 1.
Okay. Yeah.
He is like, he's got his deal. Like
Yeah.
he has something he does and he does it every morning and that works for him. And that's great. I would die. I cannot do
Right.
that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I really, and that's part of the breathing room is providing tools for your toolbox of spiritual formation. So you have all these different things you can pull from. I want to pull from something different all the time. But I would say for me, this is going to sound like just the most simple, like what in the world thing. But lately, one of the most valuable things for me is a practice that I call sit and listen.
Hmm.
But it's really just silence and meditation and then a time of journaling. And so at least once a week, I will say this is something that I've been doing at least once a week. I do what I call sit and listen. And I literally pull up my journal and at the top of it, I write sit and listen. And I sit by my window and I set my timer on my phone for 10 minutes and I sit in silence for 10 minutes. And I have to bring at least a dozen times, I have to redirect my attention back to God's presence. My only goal is to sit in God's presence. And then if there's a word or a phrase or an image or something that he gives me when that time is up, and I have to have major self-control not to write anything in my journal during that time.
Right.
I'm just sitting and listening. And then when that time is up, if there's anything that I need to, record, I do that at that time. And that has been, honestly, God's made so many connections for me in that time and space. And it's part of the retraining of my brain too, just to sit in silence.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a good thing for me.
And that's not, I mean, I don't know if you come from a kind of an evangelical background like I do, but I mean, we are not taught that. Like, we're not taught to just sit and listen. Like, that's not, that seems like, what? Like, you're not allowed to do that. That's, it feels like slacker spirituality, but it's actually, it's a discipline. It's actually a thing. It's a thing to do, which doesn't, it's like a Seinfeld thing. It's like, it's nothing, but it is something,
Exactly.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is a discipline and it is doing something. It is doing something. Even when I can't feel it, it's over time, especially, I have seen it doing a lot of some things in my life for sure.
That's good. That's a good note to end on. I like that. Where can folks connect with you, learn about the breathing room and your book?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So breathingroom.life is the website.
Okay.
Breathingroom.life. And so, yeah, I try to direct people there because that's